What are people searching for that they cannot find at home, and that something actually findable in other country, or it is all just a big deception? As someone who is not living in her country, in Hungary, for 20 years now, I understand that like every coin, this story has two sides as well. Some days I think, wow, my life is the most perfect life and I'm super happy. And other days I'm just staring blank and wondering what I'm doing here, and mainly why. In this video, I will share 5 reasons why living abroad is great and 5 reasons why is it sort of challenging. And of course, there are many points I could talk about it. So if you are curious about something specific, feel free to ask in the comment section. And if enough question comes up, I will address them in another video. So if you are interested in this topic, feel free to subscribe not to miss the next video. And there is something new. If you like my work, if you find these videos useful and would like to support my work, feel free to buy me a coffee. Cheers. Link below. I am Zsuzsa and this is the Hello Emma channel. Let's dive in. Traveling is one thing, but stopping at a certain point and saying, this is my home from now, is a whole different game. I left Hungary nearly 20 years ago. I lived in London for 14 years and the rest in Guatemala and in the present Mexico. I arrived into both regions without knowing the language or having any significant resources, yet they both completely different experiences for me. No, I never been one of those person who always say, let's go and let's travel and explore the world. No, I was more of the, I'm sitting in my little village and petting my cat type of character, and I think I am. And before I turned 30, I never traveled abroad, barely even within Hungary. I hadn't been on a plane, I didn't speak any other languages than Hungarian, and even covered my first month expenses with a bank loan. The only thing was I felt suffocated at home. I couldn't see the next step. I had no vision for the future. And of course, yes, I had a bit of personal mess just to make the story as banal and everyday as possible. So suddenly I found myself to living this big foreign life, and perhaps the very best thing about it, and let's start with the positive things, experiencing a new culture. Well, this can give you adrenaline for quite a while if you are interested in the place, the culture and the traditions where you live. Since basically 2020, I've been in a kind of trance, endlessly fascinated by the Mayan and Aztec traditions, learning about the calendar, Mayan calendar, dancing Aztec dances, or going to the Temazcal every week, learning about the local customs and the way how they think. Or even just going to the market allows you to pick up a few Nahuatl word, which was the original language of the Aztecs, because the menu is written on this language. And if you pick something, you need to speak out loud. And that's how words like, for example, huitlacoche or tomate or elote become part of your vocabulary. I've been enchanted by everything around me. I sometimes think I'm a little bit like the guy from the Slumdog Millionaire, because I don't learn from books, but from life, what other people learning sitting in a classroom. For example, that was a funny moment and this very kind of my heart. One day I went to the anthropology museum and the tour guide was talking about the sunstone, the large sun disk with a face in the middle and the 20 symbols of the Aztec calendar around it, and he was listing them, but one symbol escaped his memory. And I helped him out. And the beautiful thing is, while learning about other people's culture and traditions, I've started to become more interested in my own. Who were we, the Hungarians? How did we live? What rituals and ceremonies we did before the Catholicization? And I started researching because I understand now how important it is for people to be aware where they are coming from. How important it is for people and the nation to understand their identity. Today, I believe, is incredibly important to understand where we are coming from, who we are, because without roots, the wind just blows us away. Another positive of living abroad is personal growth. This is such an important point that I won't go into detail here, but I will make a separate video about it, so you can already hit the subscribe button if you are interested in how living abroad continues to self-discovery and finding your true self. This is an incredibly fascinating and deep and exciting topic for me, especially because I've experienced it firsthand. For now, I just briefly say that stepping out of your comfort zone and having to face challenges in a new environment, challenges you never faced before, you can make you infinitely creative. It can develop emotional resilience, problem-solving skills, independence, and adaptability. Additionally, it can boost your self-confidence as you're navigating and solve unfamiliar situations. I remember as a child, I was growing up in a small village. Going to the store was a huge deal, huge adventure for me. It was a 5-minute bike ride, but I always dressed up and comb my hair beforehand because I was leaving the house. I felt I had to look in a certain way. I made a huge deal out of it. And taking the bus to the city 20 kilometers away felt like going into an amusement park. And Budapest, the capital, for me it was farther than the moon. Today, flying to the other side of the world feels like less of a mental challenge than going to the store used to. And there is one more element why I will go into it more in this other video. The environment we live greatly affects our well-being. If I sense that the environment I'm living in, it doesn't meet my needs, it's useless to try and change it. Instead, I need to find the environment that suits my needs. Improved quality of life. Here I'm not just talking about better pay, although it is true that people primarily move to places like London, they move for this reason. But rather something more important to me personally. There are countries where work-life balance is easier to achieve, and London is definitely not those places, let me tell you. In my life, I realized this when the fate redirected me from Guatemala, where I did voluntary work, to Mexico, where I obviously had to find a job. And yeah, that can be a little bit tricky, especially when you end up in a teeny tiny village where very few people speak English, and those who do are scattered and hidden away. And of course, I didn't speak Spanish. Plus, I didn't know anyone, so I didn't have connections. And this is what leaves you two paths. When, first, you had to be so very creative to make the clients understand that you exist and you are here and you want to work. So creative that you surprised by yourself. And the second, I had to trust that the universe wanted the same I wanted and would happen. That is true that by the time I got to Mexico, I already had a little bit of momentum behind me, because I learned the key lesson in Guatemala, which is, if you don't have money, don't give up, but go home, look around, check what you can sell and go and sell. Or just bake a cake and go and sell. There are millions of ways to make money. Actually, this was a huge lesson for me, like a person who started from the 9 to 5 basic. And eventually I got enough work to cover food and accommodation, and as I live in a small village where everything is cheap, so I was able to step out of the rat race I was trapped while I was living in London, where I used to work 7 days per week, sometimes from early morning till the night, when I became a freelancer. But it wasn't much better before. that either, because as a newbie in London, I used to collect and wash cups in bank buildings, which meant waking up 4 o'clock in the morning to get to the city center by 6 a.m. or my very first job collecting glasses in a pub where I worked until 4 a.m. Those 14 years been everything except work-life balance. In those 14 years, I worked what felt like 200 years worth. Here I have the luxury that when I work is something I enjoy. I don't accept jobs anymore where I have to travel too much, where they don't pay enough, or where I feel that we are not really on the same wavelength with my clients. And by today, I reached what I call the ultimate luxury. I go to each of my clients like I'm visiting friends. So even though I'm officially working, I don't feel like the time I spend with them is work. And if my clients were to go in a vacation in the same time and suddenly I have zero income, I only feel a little bit anxious and mostly out of habit, because deep down I know I am safe. Because when I had a lot of work, I saved enough because I could and I don't have to worry. And during those times, I make, for example, this video, and I can write articles, I can learn Spanish or do the Aztec dance or anything I want, really. International connections. This sounds a bit political, don't you think? So it is not just possible, but it is inevitable. Yes, one could say that people just pass through and friendship don't go too deep, as I already mentioned. And I am kind of the person who is sitting in her little village. So that's my character, that's my attitude, which means I like to stay in one place for a longer period. For example, when we were isolated in the middle of the jungle during COVID for 7 months, bonds were formed between people that would never have happened in a normal life. When the computer geek ferments cabbage, when the bar manager finishes his shifts and becomes a hairdresser and cuts everyone's hair around, or when the Indian guys cook an amazing Indian dinner for all of us, or when a Dutch person sees and holds a chicken, a real alive chicken, in his hand for first time in his life, and you can see a mix of excitement and fear along the joy on his face that yes, I did it. And then the new oven was finally built, and his first use turns into a pizza party, which still just thinking about makes your mouth water. Or when you're cocooning together on the dog-smelling couches on rainy days and watching movies. Well, this connection will never break. And I know if I go to India, France, or any other part of the world, I can always visit these people, and they will always welcome me with open arms. This is how the world shrinks into a small village, where there are places you can feel at home because you are welcomed by these people. And just that, instead of popping into Mary's place on the next street or the 2 streets away, you are going 2 countries away and, let's say, visiting Justina, for example. It's all the same, and both are great as long as there is someone to visit. Only the scale changed a little bit. This is perhaps one of the most beautiful aspects of living abroad. Surprises and new information around every corner. Living abroad can surprise you even during the most simple everyday activities. For example, you go to the market, you buy a certain food or plant, you have no idea what it is. You buy it, take it home, Google it, ask your neighbor what is that and eat, or maybe not, or cook it regarding a recipe you just found on the internet. I will forever be grateful for London, for the diversity I could experience there. What I loved most in that city was that you didn't have to go abroad if you want to feel you are somewhere else. For example, If I went to the area where lots of Indian people have been living, I could bump into seemingly insane Indian celebrations and street festivals. And if I got tired of all the exploring, the local bus take me home just in half an hour into my apartment. I learned, for example, that Polish people have pretzels alias ropi in Hungary, but they call them paluski. Or that you can not buy poppy seed cakes anywhere in the world, only in Hungary and the Jewish shops. In London, I discovered foods I never tasted before, like chia seed or quinoa or avocado and mango. Yes, don't forget, we are talking about Hungary 20 years ago. The only problem was in London that nothing really had too much flavor and that the old so-called healthy stuff was super expensive. Then I crossed over the other side of the ocean, and here there are a feast of flavors. Not only there are tasty banana, mango, avocado and etc., but I found out, just like with apples, which comes in countless varieties in Hungary, these plants also have many different types. And the other wonderful thing is that the products I would only gaze at longingly on the shelves of the health food stores in Europe, thinking it would be nice to buy, but I'm not paying that much, are ridiculously cheap here because they are produced locally and shipped to Europe from here. I must admit, as a vegan person, for me eating well here much easier than back home. But I must note, I don't live in a big city. I live in the countryside where there is no Tesco, Sainsbury's, Walmart, but there is market, there is local producers, and yes, there are parts of the year when we have lots of avocado for pennies, and there are other parts of the year when there is no avocado because it doesn't have the season. And the other side, living in a countryside, when there is a season, then the avocados hanging down in my face, even on the streets. And now, after all of these glitters and the rainbow ponies, let's take a look at the other side. What are the challenges that might arise if you are living abroad? Getting used to a new environment. I think it is safe to say that anything new is adrenaline fueled and exciting and interesting at first, but once you have to live in it for a longer time, is not so fun anymore. For example, I lived in the jungle for a month and I fell in love with it so much that I went back. Then came another 7 months, and during that time I got to know the rainy season. It didn't just test my nerves because it was cold and the sun wasn't shining, which for me, after living 14 years in London, is a sensitive issue. But it also meant, since the air was constantly humid, the laundry never dried. What's more, the dry clothes became rotten. Everything got moldy, the clothes, the books, everything organic. And of course my electronic devices got broken too. Today I have only 3 external hard drives which are waiting to be recovered one day. If there is too much rain, and in the rainy season there is too much rain, it can simply soak through cables or just wash them away, and there is no electricity and internet for weeks. And this is quite challenging and inconvenient if you want to set up a YouTube channel. And during this time, yes, there are more insects. So basically we could find a lot of palm-sized cockroaches which are getting everywhere and eating everything. For example, my passport. Long story short, everything breaks down. And after a while, it is not so funny anymore. And yes, first it was kind of fascinating to go to sleep and check the scorpion under the pillow and the blanket, or falling asleep staring at a tarantula that maybe it will fall on me during the night or not. I have to admit that after a while I became so paranoid that even a fly could freak me out easily. Yes, and in the beginning it's very great to live in a community and meet new people, but after months without a personal space, I could experience which one of my yoga teacher in London was teaching me that all of the space your body occupies from the world, that is yours. No more. Well, for me, who is an introvert, like I am able to stay without people for days in a silence, and I'm even enjoying it. Yeah, for me, living in a constant noise and constant chatter and constantly surrounded by people, after a while I felt my soul is getting just broken into pieces. Language. And in the meanwhile, you and the local people are looking each other like aliens. Because you have no idea what they are talking about. And when after 2 years you're already bubbling some few words, they ask you, why don't you speak the language yet? Meanwhile, you are working and moving and trying to grow new legs. For example, I started a YouTube channel with yoga videos, which ate up 28 hours from the 24 hours. I almost forgot, I'm not a language genius. Quite the opposite. And to make things even more spicier, I was much closer to the 50 than the 40, so I also have to fight against the shrinking of my brain cells. That's a challenge. That was a challenge for me. Actually, that is a challenge for me. But this can easily fall into the opposite, into the positive group as well. Because here nothing can stop you from learning a language, or at least nothing except yourself. But if you have even the slightest desire, you can do it. Just imagine going to the store to shop and not only get what you need, but you also take part in a free listening comprehension class. This is such a huge advantage compared to someone who is back home and can only practice language in a class environment. Deeper human connections. And while you are adapting and trying to get into the same linguistic platform as others, it would be nice not to live in complete isolation, ergo to socialize. But when you are still just happy that you didn't say good morning again in English, but in half asleep you managed to recall buenos dias, it won't be easy to have very deep and meaningful conversations. Hence, building deeper human connection won't come easily. Yes, there are days when you feel that it's just you and the world, like standing on the two opposite sides of a chasm, and on the world side of all the human beings, and on the edge of nothingness, you are alone. Yes, this is part of the picture. I remember my first days in London when an agency who was helping me to find accommodation put me into the room with a complete stranger, with a girl who was working in the night, and she was sleeping during the day, of course, in the day when I was job hunting. So basically for a days I was sitting alone in the room and there was no one to talk to. I couldn't understand a word. I didn't even know where is the zebra crossing because it was marked differently. I didn't know where is the store, or even if I found one, what are those things on the shelves. I didn't recognize anything. I didn't know what I will eat. And of course, from all of these million buses, which will takes me into the city center. And it was raining on top of it. I never felt so lonely and so lost in my whole entire life than in those days. Finances. Now I'm going to talk about a scenario when someone arrives into a place with a suitcase and no significant savings or background support. Since you can't fit too much into your suitcase, to make everyday life a bit smoother, you will need to buy a few things which cost money. And if there is no work for a while which is realistic, you will have to rely on those hopefully existing savings. Then, if our hero is lucky and persistent and doesn't run home after a few weeks, but somehow manages to pull themselves together over a few years, but for some reason has to move again and doesn't want to travel with 40 suitcases this time because they don't want to spend a fortune shipping their belongings, they might have to leave everything behind. The clever ones hold yard sales where they sell the stuff they accumulated over the years for pennies, and they can start collecting again when they move to a new place. So basically, no matter how you look at it, every new beginning comes with extra expenses. As I mentioned in my previous video, I was volunteering for almost 2 years. Initially, I lived a little bit far from civilization where there was not even a store, so I didn't spend anything. There was housing, food, and no store. But when later I moved to a new place, I only paid for my accommodation through work, so that part was practically free. However, I had to take care of my own food, and there was store, which began to erode my saving. Needless to say, it didn't take long for them to wear down completely. In short, you can do it cleverly and live totally minimalistically, but that's only fun for a while. I have to admit, after wearing the same 2 outfits for 7 months, I was so bored with myself at the end that I would have given anything for a new piece of clothing. Safety. When I lived in San Marcos, which is a small place in Guatemala, I realized how much on an island of peace Hungary is. There it was totally normal for someone to rent a cute little house, settle in, and one day come home that the house was robbed. And few months later, again. And even the whole community knew who did all the hurt. They did nothing. They've been just hoping that they would not be the next ones, or that the bad ones would somehow end up back in prison. But no one messed up with them because they've been too dangerous. Or it was quite common again that someone was traveling on the tuk-tuk, and at one point the tuk-tuk was stopped by men with machetes, and you can imagine they didn't want to play a check. Neither of these things ever happened with me, thankfully, but when I wanted to go for hiking, for example, alone in the mountains, local people advised me not to, because I might come back home without my phone if I come back at all. In Mexico, for instance, it is completely normal for people to go missing, or if in some regions for buses to be stopped by bandits who they collect the phones of the passengers or anything else they are fancy. No, I haven't experienced this either, and I'm kindly asking the universe to keeping me away from all these kind of situations in the future as well. Thank you. And there is one more bonus point I found important, but I couldn't really categorize it. This is answering the question, where is home? The thing is, once someone stepped out of their homeland, they made a decision that comes with irreversible consequences, because you see and hear and experience things about the world and about yourself that when you return home, that will make life seem a bit smaller. You will always feel a little bit like you stand out from the group of those who never left home, but truly putting down roots elsewhere, that's questionable too. I will be always Hungarian, no matter where I live. Nothing can change the fact I will never be English or Mexican or Indian. Just like a hamster, it won't turn into a fish if it falls into an aquarium. Okay, that's a bit silly example, but something like that. So as you see, this point can fall into the con and into the pro sides as well. And this is exactly how I feel. On bad days, it's in a con column and I think, oh, poor me, I don't belong anywhere, I don't have real home. But on the good day, it's in the pro column and I feel, wow, what a perfect experience. The whole world is my home. I can be home wherever I want. In conclusion, if you would ask me what I would change if I could turn my life back in 20 years, I would say nothing. No, I'm not saying it was easy many times, and lots of times it is still not easy. But I wouldn't trade my life. Thank you if you are still here with me. I hope that despite all of my personal experiences, I was able to give a little bit more objective ideas. How is living abroad? If you have any question, write them down in the comment section and subscribe so you don't miss the video where I will answer these questions. See you in the next video. Big hugs.